All righty. Well, welcome and happy Wednesday to all of you out there watching today. And for those of you that watch later, happy whatever day it is. um, uh, it is 11 o'clock Central Time on Wednesday. You are on the RV Life YouTube channel or the RV Life Facebook page. And we would like you to continue to do that. Please subscribe and like and follow and thumbs up and all of those things to make sure that you are notified when new videos like this or new live streams like this come out, as well as additional videos. We actually put up a couple of new videos last week pertaining to filters and drag routes and some things. We actually took some snippets out of the live video and created some little sort of pocket videos for that task. Today, I'm going to bring you, as you can see the stream, the ticker running there, just 11 mistakes that RV trip planners make, mostly pertaining to RV Life Pro and the way they use the products. And then we're also going to we'll start out actually by talking about the wildfire layers that are built into RV Life Trip Wizard. All the news about the big fire in Yosemite and this, that, and the other kind of got me thinking we haven't really talked about it or shown it all that much this year. So we'll touch on that real quick, and then we'll drop out and we're going to talk about just a variety of little mistakes folks make. And then most importantly, we're going to field and try to answer your questions and comments. So let's dig right in. I'm going to stop this ticker real quick and we'll go back to comments. I'm going to share my Trip Wizard screen. And that should move over nicely there. Okay. First, we're going to talk about this wildfire layer. Now, obviously, if you're planning a trip 6 months from now, you can look at that all you want, but it's not going to be all that relevant until you get ready to go. But let's take this trip, for example, here. This is let me do show entire trip. This is and I'm going to turn off the driving radius just to kind of clean up the map a little bit. You can see I've already turned off campgrounds. So the only thing on my route here is where we're starting. It's a state park on the coast near Los Angeles. We're going up to Yosemite here and then over to Las Vegas. And if I go ahead and zoom in on this Yosemite area here, this looks like a fine route. It's an RV safe route. I've utilized my elevation and gradient tools to determine whether this is a safe route or not. There's certainly some peaks in here, but with a little bit of street view and satellite view, we determined it's fine. Okay. But, let's say I'm headed out to take this trip very shortly, and I've been seeing the news about the wildfires, so I'm concerned. So let's go in and turn on that wildfire layer here. And we can see that one of these is right on my route. And if I click on this, it's called the Oak Fire. It's only 32% contained and has burned 18,000 plus acres. And it shows this information was last updated today at 9:30 a.m., presumably my time. So this is still a real concern. So if I actually if I was insistent on taking this route, or I felt like it was the only safe route, obviously, if you look over here on 41, we don't know that this is an RV safe route. Obviously, our routing avoided this for some reason, but it too has a fire concern of its own. I could potentially maybe come up a different way, but the point is, I need to be concerned about this, and I might want to do my research, Google the Oak Fire, maybe look at the California Transportation website or highway website or whatever. But clearly this is a concern for this particular route. And, it might be a big enough issue that we may end up it's a longer route, but we may end up wanting to take the 99 all the way up here to Manteca and come across to this campground. That's how seriously we need to take this section here. So It looks like once I'm up here, it's not too bad coming across and heading towards Vegas. And as we zoom out, we can see that a good portion of Southern California is on fire. And so, not to make light of it, but it's certainly an issue with, it's no secret. There's the drought and whatnot in California. The fires are a concern. Obviously, this works for any part of the country. But I really, there's nothing going on here. There's one down here, a little bit of near Longview, something going on. But I knew I could sort of count on that Yosemite fire because it's been in the news. It's bad. And I fully expected to see some action on that. So that's just a quick look at wildfires. While we're in the weather layers, we can do the same with wind speed. This is particularly those that might be traveling across 70 or 80 across here. Might need to be concerned about wind speed. Looks like all of this is green and blue, so none of it's really too catastrophic. We can see we're getting into the yellow up where we would usually expect it, come across 94 here in North Dakota, but even that is not too terrible. We get into those reds, that's another matter. And similarly, I think we've got one more layer here. We can look at the weather radar. And again, this doesn't do us any good 3 weeks or 3 months in advance. But certainly if I'm headed out in a day or two and I'm headed toward the Cincinnati, Columbus area, this is enough to, when I look at something like this, if I had a route going through there, this would be enough to cause concern, potentially change campgrounds, particularly change routes, change campgrounds. Some of these, if you get a campground that's nice, but it's terrible when it's raining, it's a lot of mud or red clay or whatever, or a very grassy, if your site is, rather than gravel or concrete, if your site is a grass or dirt site and you're looking at being there a week and a really strong rain, now we're talking about the possibility of getting stuck, things like that. So this is just additional tools to help you, but without a doubt, most of this section that we just talked about is more of the kind of right before I go, or as I'm getting ready to go within a day or two of planning. So we would want to keep an eye on that weather. At that point, you go to weather.com and you check it out and see what's going on, right? How long is it going to be bad? I think I use NOAA for most of my weather stuff. And we've got weather, of course, right in the app. But if you want that long-term picture, that's worth checking out. Plus, just as a quick reminder, if we pick a campground in this area, let's see, I don't have any filters. Let's grab a campground right near this red mess. We can see what's going on right here. We don't even have to leave the site. We don't have to leave TripWizard to get that long-term forecast. So here I've got rain today, Thursday, Friday, maybe clearing up, and then a little bit of rain coming back in. So, if this is your campsite or your plans, maybe you change them, But again, we want to give you all the tools you can have right here in TripWizard without even having to leave to go to those other sites. So, and just to go back on the weather for a second, a lot of times here we'll have annual averages of rainfall and temperature. Obviously, what we're concerned about right now is what's going on here in the next week or so. So anyway, so that's that. So those are the 3 layers we have. We've talked before here about this public lands layer. We'll just look at it briefly since we brought it up. Let me kill this radar layer and pull up this public lands. We looked at this a couple of weeks ago, and this is just a way to see where the public lands and national parks and things are. If we go back to our Yosemite trip, and we'll turn off campgrounds again, we can see obviously where the national parks and where some of these places are, Death Valley, and these public lands. When you're planning a trip, and perhaps maybe you don't want to stay at a campground, or maybe there's not one, but maybe there's not one that can accommodate you. Either way, let's say we're going to Sequoia National Park here. This shows me where the actual park is. Now, if I turn this on, I can maybe find a campground right inside the park. But of course, amenities are usually slim to none. But perhaps I might just stay just outside the park. And all of a sudden, I've got a lot more options here. But I don't want to hop in the Toad and have to drive 4 hours to get to the park either, right? I want to have something that's nearby. And so as I'm planning this trip, I can kind of pinpoint these places that are close and have the amenities I want. So that public lands layer is another handy dandy layer you can use. Okay, so that is that. So what I want to talk about now are these 11, I didn't really intentionally come up with 11, it just kind of came that way. I was just going over some items, but let's talk about some mistakes that people make when they're trip planning, all right? Number one is overestimating the RV height. We see a little bit less of this now. And if we go here to our trip settings, I can look at my RV info and we can see that I have manually entered my data here. I could also look up my RV, and this is what most people do. And when you do that, you typically, you're going to get the right info. But if your RV is not listed here, I'm just seeing if mine is, if your RV is not listed here and you decide to manually enter your data, and we can see this is the correct technical data for my rig. Now I've gone out there and measured, and I know it's actually 43 feet. And when we weigh out fully loaded, I'm actually closer to 36.5. What I don't want to do here is say, especially if you've got a fifth wheel, and the fifth wheel folks are really up there, 13 feet, 13.2, 13.3, that type of thing. And I've seen so many people say, well, you know what, just to be safe, I'm going to put in 14 feet. And, that's the worst thing you can do. The minute you get yourself over that 13.6, now you're falsely reporting your height, and you're also kind of over what is sort of a standard. And all of a sudden now you look like an oversized load. And you're going to be treated differently. You're going to be routed differently. Even if the freeway bridges are 16.5, if you're deemed an oversized load, it may have you go off of every bridge is going to be off the freeway, back on the freeway, off the freeway, back on the freeway, because they're not taking chances. The trucking industry and the laws and the rules and things like that, they say, well, if your height is such and such, we're going to navigate you this way. So don't falsely report your height, okay? Put in the accurate number and you're good to go. All right, that's number one. Number two is not planning every stop of your trip. And what I mean by that, let me see if I've got a trip here that's fairly loaded. Let's look at, this is a decent example here, I think. Don't forget, if you have questions, ask them. So here's a little trip. This is a circuit of 5 of Utah's national parks. And you might look at this and go, all right, great, my trip's planned, I'm ready to go. But what that tells me is you're driving from park to park. You're not stopping for gas, for food, for rest areas, for any reason whatsoever. You're not stopping at all. And that's not accurate. And so what ends up happening is you end up not using the tools in the app properly. Now you're out there floundering, hey, when's the next rest area, or where can we grab some groceries or whatever. Now you're going off your route, you're winging it, right? And that's exactly what we don't want to do as RVers. Now, again, we've said it before, if you've got a small camper van or a Jeep and you're pulling a a small pop-up or something like that, you have a pretty fair degree of flexibility. But everybody else needs to take these into consideration. And just winging it is not how we plan trips, right? You want to have a complete trip, not only so you've vetted that trip properly, and I'm just taking a look at another trip here. Not only so that to know that you've vetted your trip properly, but you're not winging it. You're dealing with fuel stops and bathroom stops and lunch breaks and all of the things that you want to do. You're dealing with those. So that is mistake number 2, is not planning all of your stops, right? Number 3 kind of ties in with that, which is not vetting your entire route carefully. You know, I look at this route here and it's 5 national parks, and that's it. That's all I've got on here. But have I gone in and have I checked the elevation? Okay, 4 or 5%. You know, that's something to think about. I've actually been on this, the Highway 12 here, and it's a wonderful drive. It's a safe drive. It does require all of your attention. You know, so do I know that? You know, I look at this 5% grade elevation, and there's my elevation. So that's 9,000 feet right there, and the grade is between 3 and 5%. So it's in my best interest to vet that thing out. To vet that out with satellite view and street view and all of the tools we're giving you to know what your route is. Now, I'm going to stop for a question. Mark has a great question. And so to some extent, Mark, we have this. And Mark says there should be a warning notice to say if you're over a certain height, you may be rerouted. Yeah, that's actually a good idea, Mark. We do have some warning built in where it says no RV safe route found and things like that. But you know what? And I think, let me just test this. And I don't like to test stuff live because if it doesn't work, I look like an idiot. But, you know, half the time I do anyway. But if I set this at 14.7, there's some certain parameters here. Yeah, that's not one of them. There's some certain height and weight parameters that if you go high, we actually ask you, hey, are you sure about that? I don't think it's height. I want to think it was weight maybe. Yeah, so if I put too much weight, it says your RV, is it really that heavy? I think, Mark, that's a great idea. We probably should have something to verify or just double check. Hey, are you sure your RV is really that high? So great comment, Mark. Appreciate that. So that ties in again, or to go back to what we were talking about. If I'm concerned about this section here, where that elevation is in the 9,000 range, whoops, and then I'm worried about that 3 to 5%, let's go to satellite view, let's go to street view, let's look at that stretch of road to see if that's comfortable or not. And again, we just go to satellite view real quick. And, you know, we can't tell a lot here with satellite view. Sometimes you'll see a truck on the road or you'll see an RV or whatever. But if we can go to street view, let's see if we can get a nice view of that. And we can see that, yeah, that's fine. Again, this is, there's plenty of shoulder. It's a nice flat road. It may be 6% or 5%, but it's a nice 5%. I've driven the 12, and it gets into some windy areas, but they're safe. But again, it's not one hand on the wheel drinking a water bottle. It's 2 hands and paying attention and, you know, telling the kids to shut up kind of stuff. But it's a really nice looking drive. So again, the point here is that if we go back to the category here was not vetting your route and then finding yourself surprised, whether it's a gas station you thought you could fit into and you can't, or it's a route that's windier or taller than you imagined, or something. Even especially if we get into streets going into campgrounds. You know, if you look at it by satellite view and it's obviously a wooded area, and you're concerned, okay, how bad are those trees encroaching on my space? Am I going to scrape my RV all up? We'll go to Street View and check it out, right? So all of these things. So mistake number 3 is not vetting your route as carefully as we give you the tools to do. All right, number 4, not double checking your drag route waypoints. And we covered this very recently. And the idea there, I think I covered it last week for that matter. I don't think I have that. Let's see if I still have that trip in here, because it was a great example. Yeah, right here. So we covered this last week, but it is a very common mistake, and I do want to touch on it again. I'm going to turn off campgrounds. The example that we used was we said, well, I want to drag this route. I don't want to go through Fort Worth. I'm going to go through East Dallas and go by the Mesquite Rodeo and take a picture of the sign and say I was there, right? So whatever that, and it applies to whatever location you are. If you just want to drive by it, see it, snap a picture, whatever, we need to coerce our route. We talked about all the different ways to coerce our route to that location. But in this specific instance, if we drag a route and we just let go, we need to vet this route carefully. And just like before, because we were sort of freely dragging and dropping that thing at 50,000 feet without a lot of precision, we find ourselves getting off on Gross Road, coming around, getting back on the freeway, then getting back off on Military or whatever it was, Cyene Road, and then getting back on the freeway. Basically taking a loop in the middle of our trip for no apparent reason. Why? Because look at where our waypoint landed. This thing's trying to get us as close to the waypoint as it can because we didn't drag with precision. We just threw it over there, right? And so we go back and delete that waypoint. But anytime you use the drag and drop, the drag route feature, you've got to zoom in and vet, because at that 30,000 foot view, it looks fine. And maybe, again, maybe it's 50,000 feet. But I look at that and go, hey, great. TripWizard did exactly what I wanted it to do. But if I zoom in, now I'm taking my RV into a local mall and then getting back on the freeway. Well, that's not what we want to do. So we've talked about it last week. Go back and watch last week's broadcast if you want to know about route coercion and all the different ways you can manipulate that route safely and properly. But mistake number 4 is not double checking your drag route waypoints. Let's see, we've got a question. Now, if you drag something that's not a safe route, TripWizard is going to show you that yellow warning message, no RV safe route found. Anytime you drag a route, unless you're just putting yourself on a freeway, anytime you drag a route, though, you should zoom in and check that out with satellite view, street view, things like that, just to know what you're getting into. And certainly getting off the road and pulling into the mall is an RV safe route. I mean, those people have trucks restock their supplies and things all the time. It's not that it wasn't an RV safe route. It's just going to turn into, depending on traffic, a 20-minute waste of time. But if you end up getting in an RV unsafe route, you should get that yellow warning that says no RV safe route found. So I hope that helps that. Okay, let's see. Number 5, I think we are. Number 5 is simply not using the RV Life GPS app. And by what I mean by that is not using it to pull up your trip and navigate the trip you've planned exactly the way you planned it. I've seen loads of people create a great trip, and then print it out or export it to Excel. And then they get behind the wheel, like, all right, where are we going? And then they just use whatever GPS they have, or they just go, without using the tool. And so now you're relying on a third-party GPS or your memory or whatever to get you to that spot instead of using the app that takes the route that you planned carefully. So use the app. And then the inverse of that is not planning a trip with TripWizard so you can navigate with the app. You know, it's easy to say, well, we're only going here and then here. I know that route in my head. I don't need to plan it. Maybe not, but in your mind, are you saying, although I will have to stop at a rest area somewhere and I probably need to get gas and we probably need to stock up on some things first, just plan it. So we give you the tools, the trip planner, the app, they work together. And so the mistake is not using both of those tools if it's at your disposal. Sure, a 2-hour drive that you've made 100 times to the same campground, and sure, you don't need it. We get that. But anything else that involves stops or multi-day trips of any kind, you really should use both tools. Plan it and then navigate it. Okay, number 6, maybe. Not choosing an accurate starting location. So this can get you in trouble. When you create a new trip, let's just do that. We'll just call it location. I'm going to create a trip. Now we've gone over this before, but I've got 3 ways to show the starting location of my trip. Now, the use my location, of course, is the easiest, but it's also, with all the security, firewalls, the different types of mobile access and things that we have now, it can also be not so accurate. And in that, if you're using like a cell phone hotspot, it may detect your starting location at a cell tower a little ways down this way. Or if you're behind a firewall, that starting location may be at the switch. Or if you have your location services blocked for security reasons, it won't show it at all. So keep in mind, when using your location, if it doesn't show you exactly where you are, stop using it. Instead, go down here and plug in your exact physical address. Okay. And the third option, of course, is we could show the map, and that simply does that. It shows the map. And now what I can do is physically find my location on the map, wherever we are, and choose that as a starting point. Trying to decide if I'm even capable of doing that here. 114, 171. Yeah, I think it's up here. So somewhere I would pick it and I would say, yeah, here I am. Boom, create a stop. And I can create that starting location. But don't leave it to chance. You know, what we see folks do is they pick St. Petersburg, Florida. Okay. And then they start building their trip. Well, then they get behind the wheel, and their phone is smart enough to say, hey, we're right here, right? I'm going to start navigating you because I'm a GPS. We're going to start here and go this way. And you're like, no, I plan to go this way, but you aren't there, right? You aren't at City Center in St. Petersburg, Florida. You're where you really are, where your phone is. And it's going to navigate from there, which means your route's going to be different, which means it's not going to be the route you planned and vetted. So start where you really are. And this is a good question here. A great question. So Roy, so most trips start from home. Is there a way to set a default starting point, or do I have to enter my home address each time I plan a trip? There will be that option to have a starting location or a common location that you could pick from a list. We're working towards that. There's a lot of other background stuff behind the scenes, but basically, if we think about it from database terms, I need to know when, Roy, you're logged in. I need to know that when you start a new trip, here's where you usually like to do, and present you with a list and all those types of things. We're working towards that. It's a very common request. The answer is no. Now, there is a way. We've kind of gone through this before. Let me see if I have it. Yeah, right here. I can create a starter trip right here. Now, of course, I butchered it up, but I could create a starter trip that has nothing other than my starting address. And then instead of creating a trip, naming it, choosing a date, choosing my starting location, I just always open my starter trip, make a copy, and then modify it. At the end of the day, it's a kind of a wash. Which one's more hassle, right? If there's always one or two things, like for me, I might always start at home and fill up at this one pilot on the way. I could do those first two stops and make that my starter trip, and then just always copy that trip when I want to create a new trip. So that's a somewhat of a workaround. If you were to actually measure clicks and time, however, is it any faster than just typing in my address real quick? I don't know. It depends on you and your preferences and those types of things. So someday there will be a sort of a place where you can just add this to my trip and it's always your starting location and things like that. We're just not there just yet. So good question, Roy. All righty. So let's go to our next. Okay. So the next biggest mistake that we see people make is to avoid tolls. Now, on the surface, that seems like a good thing, right? Avoid paying money and avoid. A few years ago, we would have added to that, avoid paying money and avoid those skinny, scary toll booths, right? In a big rig. And they don't use that anymore, right? All the toll booths are gone. Most places, they've got sensors that read your license plate. There's the train. And a month later, you get a bill that says, hey, it's $8 or $5 or whatever, you drove through this town. Of course, you're looking at it because you don't have your, you don't have your rig license plates memorized a lot of times like you do your everyday vehicle. And you're like, who is this and why were they in Spokane, Washington? And then you're, oh yeah, we drove the rig through there. So so avoiding tolls from the booth and all that standpoint is not a big deal. Avoiding tolls to save on the money is fine, obviously, but avoiding tolls can really lead you in some squirrely directions. And part of that comes from the fluidity of the definition of tolls. Now as companies have put tolls, I'm in the DFW area and they've just added roads and it's, of course, it's to my immense benefit that I pay to get on this other road that I think we paid for already in tax dollars. But now we get a toll tag and we get this and we get that. So the other things we run into is other things are also considered tolls. The entrance to the airport is considered a toll. The entrance to a national park. Sometimes that national park road can be very long from the start gate to the accommodations, miles, right? And so now those are considered tolls. There's certain roads that go through cities that have a high occupancy lane, and then that lane's considered a toll if you use it and blah, blah, blah. And all of a sudden you're getting routed around what looks to be an obvious way to go. So avoid tolls. We have it there for your convenience and it can be used. You just need to use it judiciously and remember, you have to remember when you turn it on. And if you're looking at a route going, what in the world? And we did a demonstration the other day, as a matter of fact, that little stretch right here from Kansas City to Topeka, this section here, the Kansas Turnpike. So I'm on I-70, which is a cross-country freeway, right? Except that little section that the folks in Kansas just said, yeah, we're just going to take money at this spot. And now you have to come down and juke over and come up to Topeka. All of a sudden your route is miles and miles longer than you planned. And it's like ridiculous. Why is that there? Because you chose avoid tolls. So again, just a mistake people can make. It has some merit. It's like any of these things. They have value at certain conditions. But in this case, don't get willy-nilly with avoid tolls, right? Or at least remember you've turned it on so that if you see something weird, you can go, I need to turn that off and check it again. And apparently they're power washing the world outside our door, so if it's a little loud, apologies for that. All right, let's move on. No more questions. Let's go to the next problem. Forgetting about, the next biggest mistake is forgetting about the show-only preferred campgrounds. So let's talk about that, because not everybody even remembers this setting is here. But if I go to memberships and clubs, of course, I just clicked on the wrench here. I went to memberships and clubs, and I can go through here and click all these different things that I prefer. In this case, I have all of them selected. Why do I have all of them selected? Because I don't really have a preference. I just want all the shiny little icons to show up, right? If I was truly, say, only looking for Thousand Trails, and I only selected Thousand Trails, all my other icons would be generic green tent icons, except the Thousand Trails icon, which would be the Thousand Trails icon. It would make it easier for me to identify a Thousand Trails location. Same with all of these. I just check them all because I want to see all the logos. I just prefer that, but that's neither here nor there. Now, this isn't the real gotcha, however. I can go to next, and I can organize these into a different order. We've talked about this before. Why would I want to do that? Well, if you have a campground that is a KOA and a Good Sam, and you're only, depending on how you've got these organized, that icon will show up as whichever you have first. So if I'm really looking for KOAs first, I want that at the top. If they happen to be AAA and Good Sam and FMCA and all those other things below it, that's great, but I want the visual of the KOA first. But again, this isn't going to kill you. This is just different icon manipulation. This one is what kills you, is the next one. You can choose show only preferred campgrounds. So if I, in the previous screen, if I selected only Thousand Trails, and I came here and clicked show only preferred campgrounds, well, guess what's going to happen? Yeah, I'm only going to see Thousand Trails. No matter how much manipulation I do on the right-hand side with filters and choices and all of these things, if I've down here at the core told it show only preferred campgrounds, that's all I'm ever going to see. So this is fine to use. Again, the mistake we said was forgetting that you've used it. Okay. And so for that reason, just remember, if you choose to show only, that's all you're going to see. So when I come out here and turn on these campgrounds, the only thing I would see here is Thousand Trails, which is great. If you are a TT member, Thousand Trails Encore, if you are a member and you are just hard set that that's the only places you're going to go, that's terrific. But if you're coming across the country and you can't find a place to stay and you're like, gee, there's no other campgrounds, what happened? Remember, you have that selected and you might need some help. Turn that on and find some other campgrounds. So just a quick reminder again, another tool that we give you that has benefit to it, but if you forget you're using it, you can get yourself in a problem there. All right, let's come down to, let's try to find my mouse. It's literally gone. Oh, there you go. Okay, avoid toll, forgetting about default settings. So we've looked at and talked before where each trip has its own trip settings. So for this particular trip, I've got my RV height, I've got my routing and driving preferences, and I've got my expenses. However, for another trip, those could be all completely different. The old example I've used before is if I wanted to take a tour of Corps of Engineers parks, which are $20 a night, I might set up my trip that way. But if I'm going to go down to Florida and take a tour of luxury motorhome resorts, it's going to be a different cost and different amenities and different results. I might set those settings for that trip up differently. But no matter what, every new trip derives its settings from your default settings. So to get to your default settings, you're going to click on your little avatar person up there where your name pops out, and you're going to click on default settings. And the point of these default settings are to set your settings at what your typical, most preferred, most used settings are. What we don't want you to do is forget, and you have your rig, accidentally you somehow set your rig for 6 feet high, and then every trip that you create, you have to manually go in and change it, and then one day you forget to change it, right? And so you start a new trip, you planned all this planning, you're thrilled, it looks great, and you forgot to go set that setting back, and now it's taking you on places you shouldn't go. Never forget about your default settings, and just if you find yourself changing on every trip, go change them in your default settings. But again, the default settings are there. They're for a reason. They're good to have. We want that default. But again, the mistake is forgetting you have that and forgetting to tweak them if your RV changes or your driving patterns and habits change. Okay, we're almost done. Forgetting, second to the last one here is biggest mistakes is forgetting about filters. And we can see right now here at the top that I have 0 filters selected. But if I come in here and I'm fiddling around one day with this trip, this is our starter trip, and I decide I'm going to fiddle around with the filters, and I come in here and I say, well, I only want 4 stars, and I want 50 amp and Wi-Fi and laundry, and then, time to go to dinner. Let me close this trip and leave and go to dinner. And then I come back later and go, all right, let's get back working on that trip. And I go back to my starter trip. It's already open. And I look at this thing. I go, dang, there's hardly, when I zoom in, all the campgrounds disappear except just a few. That can't be right. What's going on? And that's where we've forgotten that we've set some filters. And we can see up here the number 4. That should be our first clue. Hey, I've got 4 filters set. I should review what they are. I come down here and look and go, laundry, that's ridiculous. I don't need that. 4 stars, that's not going to happen. Let's change it to 3. 50 amp and Wi-Fi, okay, I maybe need those. But now we see I have a much broader selection of campgrounds. And again, the filters are there for a reason. You could filter yourself to death. But the idea is don't forget you have filters turned on, okay? Don't forget they're there and you've chosen some, or maybe you chose some accidentally. We've gone over this multiple times here where we've selected state parks. Here's a great case where I selected state parks and it shows me 1. And says, hey, what's wrong with that? Well, because you picked state parks with 50 amp and Wi-Fi. 50 amp's probably going to fly, but Wi-Fi, not so much. The minute I turn off Wi-Fi, I've got a whole bunch more state parks to choose from. Again, because I forgot that I set that filter. So, the point there is don't forget about the filters. Finally, this last common mistake really doesn't so much pertain to TripWizard necessarily, although we do help with that, but it has to do with RVers overestimating how much you can drive, or how much driving you are willing and able to do. And it's easy for folks that are driving cars and they're road tripping and they're like, oh man, when I drive my car, I can do 12 hours in a day, right? It's a road trip. It's great, no problem. RV, I'm probably going a little slower, so I'll say 10 hours, right? Now, obviously, any of you that have driven or pulled a large RV for 10 hours know what a beatdown that is. And so for new RVers that are watching this, no. That's going to be a really long, tenuous drive. You've got stops. You're holding on typically with both hands. You're concentrating much harder than you are in a vehicle. And the story I always tell is my very first RV trip. We rented a big 36-foot gas motorhome. Not the best handling in the world, right? It was a nice RV, but still. And I thought, yeah, sure. Flagstaff to Amarillo's, it's only 9 hours. Should be a problem, right? Yeah, it was a 9-hour beat down holding that thing in line for that long, and I learned my lesson. Most RVers, as they say, 330 miles or get there by 3:30 p.m. Those phrases are common for a reason. The bigger the RV, the longer it takes. So just keep that in mind. But again, the answer to that, or the final biggest mistakes RVers make, particularly new RVers, is you're not going to be able to drive as long as you think you are, right? When we talk about getting to campgrounds and getting out of campgrounds, unless you're sprinting across the country for a funeral or something, you don't need to be out of there, 8 or 9 or 10 in the morning is fine, and get there by 4 o'clock so you can get checked in and set up before everything closes. That's a good 6-hour day. That's usually about right for most RVers. Okay, let's see. Sandy's got a good question here. What does the symbol next to campground up on the top right do? Yeah, it looks like a pin on the map. Good question, Sandy. Actually, not a dumb one at all. So this, and the funny thing about this one is, it is a pin on a map, Sandy. So good observation, and it looks very similar to this little avatar guy. So, I sometimes try to say, well, look for that little people icon in the upper right-hand corner, and it's like, well, which one? Because it looks the same. So what this one does, Sandy, so the campground one, we've all figured out that turns off and turns on campgrounds, gets them off the map, gets them out of the way. This one does the same thing with POIs, or points of interest. So, for example, if I turn on fuel stations, and we zoom out, we see a boatload of fuel here. Let's just, all right. If I wanted to turn those off quickly, I can toggle those just like the campgrounds with that little guy in the upper right-hand corner. And that's it. That's all that does. Let me take a swallow here so I don't choke. Is a quick and easy way to get them out of your way without having to go turn them on and off, just like campgrounds. Most of the time, of course, I use it when demonstrating a lot because I want to show things and then I want to unshow them. But it can equally be a great use case for this is, okay, there's some campgrounds here. Here we go. This is a perfect example. It's like I want to look at this campground, but there's points of interest covering the top of it. Now I could zoom in enough and I can manipulate it this way, but a lot of times we're sitting out here at this level going, hey, how do I click that? Well, I can turn these off and I could click it now. Or as I just said, I could also zoom in a little bit more and click it there. But then I've got to zoom back out to look at my broader view again, right? So simply turning that off is not a bad idea. So that's what that one does. Okay. That's not bad. So I'll throw the call out for a last call for any questions that might be germinating out there. I have covered what turned out to be the 11 most common mistakes trip planners make. That was all I could think of, but I'm sure there are more. Interestingly enough, one of the things we just demonstrated actually ends up being a pretty common problem, and that is campgrounds or fuel warnings getting hidden behind campgrounds and POIs. I don't know if I can duplicate it here. I've got a fuel warning somewhere, I think. Probably not traveling far enough. But I've seen this a lot where we're saying, hey, I should be getting a fuel warning and I'm not getting one. Where is it? And the problem is it's hiding behind a campground or a fuel stop. So if I turn those off, campground or a POI, and if I turn those off, then if I have a fuel warning, it's easier to see. So that is something we run into now and then, is stuff getting layered on, especially in areas where there's a lot of things together. Campgrounds can get overlaid on top of each other that are right next to each other, things like that. Steve's got a good question. Use the GPS in the app. Is there an easy way to add a gas stop while I'm driving? Not really. No. The whole idea is predicated on planning ahead and adding those fuel stops in your plan. Now, is there an easy way to do that? Sure, you can actually just stop your navigation, go back to the main screen. We already show you fuel stops that are close by. Tap on it, navigate to the fuel stop, fill up, and then go back to your trip and resume your trip. And that works just great. My challenge to you would just be, we already know exactly when you're going to need fuel. Why not just plan it ahead? Add that fuel location to your trip, vet that fuel station out, make sure you can fit in all of those types of things. But now, is that something we're looking at making even more easy and flexible? Of course. We'd love to be able to find a way for you to do that, Stephen. And although that's still, if I turn that on tomorrow, you could do it. But is that still the best way? I mean, how are you going to vet that fuel station out to know if you can fit in there? What does the in and out look like? What's the height requirement? What's how tall is it? Are the pumps, how available are the pumps? All the things that we would look at on a fuel stop. I mean, if I turn on fuel stops here, it's just, and I look at this and say, all right, well, it says that this gas station is nearby, whatever this thing is right here. Okay, let's say it picks this one as the nearest fuel station. How do I know I can get into that? And that's where I'm going to use satellite view. I'm going to use street view, and I'm going to look at it and go, no, I can't bring 60 feet of RV into this little place. So again, I would always want to add that stuff up. As we've said before, though, it's all about the size of your rig. If you got a pickup truck and a small towable, you can probably go anywhere, right? You could just bail out of your trip, pick the closest fuel station from the app, and then resume your trip. But if you're planning ahead, I'm always going to plan my fuel ahead. Okay, and so on the heels of that, Omar asks a great question, is how do I know when I need fuel? And so in every trip, you have your trip settings and your RV info. And right here, so for my rig, I hold 100 gallons. I keep 30 in reserve. So motorhome owners, you all know to keep a quarter of a tank for your generator and things like that. I add 5 more. I keep 30 in reserve. That leaves me with 70. And I've got 7.5 miles per gallon. So Trip Wizard will show me every 575 miles where a fuel warning is. Now, I don't think this trip's long enough. Let's fix that by adding something. Let's add something to it. I won't turn a campground. I'm just going to create a quick custom stop. And now we're going to see my fuel warning. Now that presumes that I'm leaving my starting location with a full tank. If I'm not, let's say I go out to my driveway and I see I got half a tank, right? So I come in here and I edit, and I say I don't have 100 gallons. I have 50. Now my fuel stop is gone because it's been recalculated and says, hey, you need fuel back here. And of course, if I add fuel here and I tell it virtually that I'm filling up, let's see if I can do that. Hold on. I did mute it anyway. I tried. Okay, so I come in here and I say, all right, look, I'm taking this route. I'm going to fill up at this pilot right here. Let's see, what's my last stop? Hang on a second. Chicago Northwest K-Way. Okay, so if I come in here and I fill up at this pilot, I'm going to add that to my trip after the Chicago Northwest KOA. Okay, so I've done that. However, I need to add fuel to it. So I click on the little pencil icon, I top off my fuel, and it saves it. Now, I don't know if I got that in the right order or not. No, I think I put it in the wrong spot. Yeah, this was after Wildwood, I think. There we go. So now I've topped off my tank, and now the fuel warning is gone. And I would just do this throughout my trip. So whether I'm starting with a full tank or not, wherever I choose to stop, I virtually fill the tank. And if this trip was long enough, at 575 miles for me, it would show another fuel warning. So I hope that helps. Let's take a look at Roy's question. A trip coming to go the Sunshine Skyway Bridge south of St. Petersburg on I-275. TripWizard says the bridge is below sea level and flat. I don't really know. Let's see if we can discern anything from that. That's assuming I'm able to find that bridge. Oh, here we go. I assume that one, right? Oh, well, you know, I don't have a route. I need to, I probably need to have a new trip for that. Let's take a look. We'll be brave. While I'm thinking about that, let me just address Omar's question. On the app, it doesn't show the POIs. Right. On the map, on the app, you're going to pull up your planned trip. Those POIs should already have been planned and added to your trip. Now, the app does have the Explore, the home screen that you can scroll through and see, and you can go to the campground map and turn some things on there. So the app is a little bit multifaceted. We might have to go on there. Yeah, and so on the heels of that again, Omar, the fuel warnings come up only on the planning side of it. You do all the planning first, then open your planned trip on the app. Yeah, you guys should, and let me just jump over to this because we're on that topic. You guys should be doing all this planning before you get behind the wheel, Omar. You should not have to be hunting for fuel stations on the fly. Plan the trip 100% in TripWizard on your laptop or a big tablet if you want, and then pull that trip up in the app, and everything is already there. And if I get a chance, I'll jump over to that and try to show you that. Okay, let's try to tackle this St. Petersburg thing. Let me do a let me just do a new trip real quick. An erg or an erg? I think it's an erg. It is what it is. And we're going to start in St. Petersburg, Florida. Okay. And now we can look at that bridge. Let's just go down and say we want to get to here. All right. And so now it has us going over the bridge. And the elevation, yeah, I've got it down to, I see what you're getting at, where the elevation is apparently underwater. And that could be a bug. It's a fair point there. Obviously, what I would do, first of all, let me screenshot this because we'll report this because that's obviously a little screwy. But if I was to see that, now obviously it's a bridge, I kind of know what I'm getting into. And I don't know, who's to say that maybe like New Orleans, it actually is technically below sea level. I'm not saying it is. I'm just throwing the idea out there. Not knowing the area or the geography, I'm just thinking out loud. But obviously, I would want to come in here and say, look, let me just let me just see what the heck this looks like. And I do this all the time. And it's like, yeah, it's a bridge. Okay. It's plenty big, lots of stuff. It's right on the, it's definitely right on the water, but certainly it's not underwater. And so I'll ask about and see what the deal is with that. I do think immediately of something like New Orleans, which is supposedly technically below sea level. You know, my geography teacher would be angry with me probably, but it's worth checking. So I appreciate that question, and I've taken a screenshot. Let me make sure it's still there. And no, in fact, it's not, because I forgot I changed my screenshot settings. So let me do it again. Hang on. There we go. And let's change my screenshots back to the downloads folder. Now I've got it. Okay, so good stuff. I appreciate you pointing that out. Obviously, there's something a little janky with that, but I would look at it from that street view and just kind of know what you're getting into. So, terrific question. Let's go back up here and look at our questions. I think we've got Omar straight, but let's go ahead and do that. Let's show everybody the app, since we've been talking about it quite a bit. Let's stop sharing TripWizard, and I need to phone showing here. Okay, and we will share that. Okay, so Omar, specifically, what we were talking about here is, let's find, well, we should be able to find one of the trips. So here is this home screen, and no matter where I am, the home screen, your phone has a GPS, the home screen says, hey, here's rest stops and fuel stops that are nearby. And I'm just going to show you those automatically without really any real physical effort here. If I wanted to try to look at some things on my own, I could go to the map and let's see if I've got, yeah, fuel and rest stops I've got selected here. And so I can see those. You can see the fuel stops right here. You know, this is that driver's truck stop. This one here is Pilot, north of Fort Worth. I think that's the one I've been to a bunch of times. So that's another way to find those, right? But why not, if I go to my trips, it reads my active trips from the cloud. And look, the St. Petersburg trip we created just a minute ago is already here. And so I can navigate with this. Now, obviously, we don't have a lot of stuff there. Let's look at this December trip I created. And we can see the first stop is home, then it's this RV place, then it's a Flying J to fill up, hitch and post. I got McDonald's on there, which is interesting. So this is a real big, this is a McDonald's on I-40, but right next to it is this gigantic parking lot that they've put for truckers or whatever, right? It's all kind of on the old Route 66 route. And so it's a cool spot to pull in. It's big enough for my rig, and I can let the dogs out or whatever briefly, or take them out, whatever. And we can walk over and grab a burger or whatever we need to do. And then gas and another campground. So I've got literally every stop I'm making, barring an emergency or something unexpected, I will be stopping nowhere except where I have planned. Rest areas, fuel stops, campgrounds, grocery stops, whatever, scenic overviews, whatever it is I want to do. Omar, I'm planning ahead, and I've used the fuel feature that we showed you in TripWizard, and I've got a video. It's an older video, but it's still really good, on our YouTube channels, the RV TripWizard YouTube channel, called Fuel Features, I think, and it's under the little older section called Speed Training. But if you look around, you'll see it there, and it really explains the fuel features perfectly. You know, you need to know your fuel capacity. You need to understand what reserve means. If you're driving a truck, it just means how many gallons you want to keep as an emergency, right? If you're driving a motorhome, it's almost always at least 25% of your tank. And then your miles per gallon. Remember, you're pulling or driving an RV, your miles per gallon are 8 to 12, maybe, right? Unless you've got a new Sprinter van, a Class B, or something small or whatever, be realistic with your mileage and then plan every fuel stop. The worst case scenario is you get there and you've burned 28 gallons instead of 30 gallons. Big deal. Top it off and move on, and just stick with your schedule. Hit the microphone again. Stick with your schedule. Okay, let's see what else we've got. I like this, Sandy. The Sunshine Bridge is a real pretty drive. It looked neat on Street View, didn't it? Do I still have that? I'm on my app screen. Let's see what Roy's got a question. 200 carriers. So my research shows that Sunshine Skyway Bridge has a 4% grade, but TripWizard shows it to be flat. Yeah, I did see a bit of a hump there. So, look, the unusual part of that is it's a man-made structure. Maybe our topographical data is off, or whoever we're sourcing the topographical data is from. I think we'll definitely go ahead and submit that to our team to review. And Roy, I totally appreciate you pointing that out, that there's something a little bit janky with that bridge. Yeah, we'll figure it out, right? We'll see what I'm part of me wondering if it's reading the actual topography and not the bridge, but that's another matter. That's for smarter people than me to figure out. So we'll let them do that. But thanks, Roy. That's good info, and we'll see what's up with that. But having said that, it kind of reinforces my mantra of always vetting everything. And if you look at that and go, wait a minute, that doesn't seem right, I better go to a Street View and see what's really going on. At least you have the comfort of saying, look, I know my route is okay. I vetted it out. I looked at it. Yeah, this one data point is a little bit squirrely, but I have the comfort of knowing. And that's what the whole point of RV Life TripWizard is, getting that comfort level of your entire trip, so there are no mysteries. No matter where you're going, and especially if you're going places you're not familiar with, which for us, there's some places we've gone repeatedly, and we all have those because they're on the way or they're comfortable or whatever the case may be. But, I'm looking at potentially some new places to go. I want to know as much as I can before I go. And and a good point from Jason. Yeah, the wildfire layers. Our development team, they cram every nugget of value they can into this thing to make it as useful as it possibly can be, to give you more than you could ever want to have, to make sure that your trip is 100% as safe and enjoyable as it possibly can be. So. Let's take a look. Edward's got an interesting point here. There is an elevation in the bridge to allow large boats to pass. Most is flat. And I think we saw that. Let's have some fun and go back to our TripWizard. And we're actually going back to the Street View. And you can see here, there's a bit of a rise here, obviously for boats and whatnot. It may take me forever to get there. And just as a side point, on any roads you're checking, right? Of course, I'm heading into oncoming traffic here, but any roads you're vetting, whether it's satellite view, street view, campgrounds, fuel stops, whatever the case may be, and you can see we're starting to come up on the rise here. When you see trucks and semis on it, that's a good thing. We get asked all the time about certain roads and certain areas and say, hey, that's not RV safe. I don't feel comfortable driving there. Yet there's a dozen campgrounds on that road, right? And if you go, you see there's There's rigs, big rigs and whatnot in those campgrounds. As we said before, RV comfortable and RV safe are two different things. I'm pretty comfortable driving my big diesel pusher now after 6 or 7 years. I wasn't so much when I first got it. In fact, I was so uncomfortable when I first got it, we didn't pull a car or a Jeep. We just planned ahead. We stocked up on groceries. We made sure we had enough. And then when we went to the next location, we did the same thing. We vetted out Walmarts and Sam's and locations where I could stock up on things before we got to the campground. After a couple of years, I was like, all right, this is fine. I'm comfortable driving this thing now. Let's do the towed, right? Let's pull a vehicle. And now I'm at that comfort level as well. So, and we talked earlier about coming down Highway 12 through Utah, through Cedar Breaks and into Escalante and all that. It's a fantastic drive, but it does take all of your attention. You know, is it RV safe? Yes. Is it RV comfortable? Yes. Was it an hour and a half before I could take my hands off the wheel to take a sip out of a water bottle? Yes. It's just, but I knew that because why? Because I vetted it out. I planned it. I checked it. I looked at it. I street viewed it. I thought, okay, this is okay. So again, that's the goal of these, is to provide the absolute most complete set of tools for you to check as much as you can check before you get behind the wheel. Thinking back to Omar's situation of he literally where he gets a half a tank and then the whole family sweats it out as to whether they're going to find fuel in time and find one they can fit in. You're passing landmarks, beautiful scenery, and you can't enjoy it because you're worried about those things. Stop. These tools prevent you from worrying about those things. You know exactly where and how far and which direction before you leave, and you can just enjoy it, right? I don't have to worry about that drive. I know where I'm getting fuel, right? So, hashtag soapbox, right? Okay, I think that is, we'll throw back out to last call again if there's any last questions. While I'm waiting for those, remember we do this every week throughout the busy season, which is usually April through August. So we've got 5 more weeks or so coming up. Our last session for the year, for the season, will be that Wednesday, August 31st. Every Wednesday at 11 a.m., subscribe to the RV Life YouTube channel, the RV Life Facebook page, if you prefer to digest that data there. The YouTube is better. They'll both alert you. I think YouTube tends to alert you easier, even if you're not in Facebook or not in YouTube at the moment. Whereas Facebook, you kind of have to be there, but once you get in, it'll throw up a warning. Every Wednesday, so like, subscribe, follow, thumbs up, do all of those things. So you'll be notified when new videos and when this thing goes live in case you forget. And all right, that looks like last call, so we're good. Another good session today, over an hour and 15 minutes or so. Great questions. So we hope to see you. Thank you, Roy, Jason, Omar, Sandy, Stephen, BB's Android, Mark Hammer. Good job. All right, thanks everyone. We'll see you next week. And until then, have your best RV life.